Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar with HICX and Sievo, where we are discussing the question of best-of-breed technologies and specifically how data-led procurement solutions create value. Before I hand over to the panel, there's a couple of administration points regarding the event today. So just to let you know, all attendees are in listen-only mode for the duration of this discussion. The event is being recorded and it will be made available afterwards, but we would love to hear your thoughts and questions throughout the webinar. So please note, there is a chat box to the right of the screen in which you can put your comments for the panel, and we have dedicated time at the end of the session to answer these. Any questions that we do not get to cover live, they will be followed up post-event, but we would like to make the event a little bit interactive where we can. So there will be a live poll, which will also appear in the chat box with the instructions coming later on. So that's enough from me. So at this point, I'm delighted to hand over to Rob Bonnar, who is our guide and moderator for this session today. So Rob, if you'd like to introduce yourself, and then I'll let you get on and introduce the rest of the panel.
Grant, thank you very much, Duncan. So yes, I'm Rob Bonnar. I'm a procurement practitioner of a number of years, already 20 years, which is surprising to me, but not to anyone that sees me. I have, let's say, I've been most excited in the last few years about what I really see as an explosion of opportunity in digitization of procurement. Yeah, and so I'm really excited to talk about it with you both today. Thank you for giving us the time, and also I love this structure. So the idea that actually we can get into some of the details. So let's say some of the challenges that I've faced, etc., and some of the difficulties that we all face as procurement practitioners, which I know is your daily work anyway, but it'd be great to get into that detail together. So yeah, Rob Bonnar, 20 odd years in procurement across a number of different categories and industries, but really focused at the minute on digital procurement and working at the moment with BP. So just started there, so I can't tell you any of their secrets yet because I've only been there for a couple of months, so I'm still very much in the honeymoon period and learning. Yeah, but maybe if I turn over to you then, Sammeli, you could start telling a bit about yourself, a bit about Sievo, and then we can hand over to Costas after you. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks. And Sammeli Sammalkorpi is my name. Actually, Sammeli is a traditional Finnish reindeer farmer name. My parents wanted me to become a reindeer farmer when I was young. But as you probably can figure out from the setup of this webinar, I didn't end up a reindeer farmer. Instead, I became a procurement software entrepreneur. For the last 18 years, actually, in a couple of weeks, for the 18 years, I've been growing Sievo. So I'm co-founder and CEO at Sievo. And Sievo is a company focusing on procurement analytics. So basically helping large companies to make sense out of their data assets from different places. So of course, the topic of today's webinar is very close to my heart, sort of data-led procurement organizations. I hate to say I don't have a procurement practitioner background, but I think in the 18 years in procurement space anyways, I at least hopefully can kind of fake that I understand something about procurement as well. Digitalization, I definitely should know something about. So I think that's briefly myself.
Yeah, good man. Thank you very much. And then obviously same question to you, Costas. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Costas Xyloyannis, so co-founder and CEO at HICX. It's great to have Sammeli, who has, I'd say, an equivalently difficult and long name as mine sometimes. So it's good.
Yeah,
I'm normally unique in that respect. And we're focused in the procurement space. So it's been a 14-year saga of building up HICX on my side, and we started off in kind of master data management. Now this has evolved into sort of digital experience, and we're very focused on supplier experience management, which is heavily linked to data, and of course enabling kind of a seamless experience across best of breed.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, thank you very much. So, with regards to the as you mentioned about best of breed, then, so in terms about let's say the way in which we see procurement technology and solutions evolving, then maybe if I turn to you first, Sammeli, then I say I've heard you talk previously about the idea of maybe moving away from ERP through source to pay and really into data-led solutions. And maybe if I give you the opportunity to kind of evangelize about the excitement around data-led solutions and then also how the fact that as we maybe move to more data-led solutions, or whether you believe, I suppose, that enables the idea of best of breed, and whether that really is a game changer for us. So maybe you could expand a bit on that, please, Simon.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. And indeed, sort of, if I look at, let's say, last 20 years of procurement software landscape, or even a bit more, I think sort of it all started when companies like SAP and so forth put together, let's say, transactional procurement solutions, which were kind of designed for creating purchase orders, reserving invoices and stuff like that. And therefore, let's say, automating the very transactional procurement processes. And that, of course, was the first wave of digitalization within procurement. And it sort of still continues. The value and business case has not evaporated. Companies are still implementing SAPs and so forth as they should. But that's really kind of transactional backbone as I see it. The next wave of, let's say, major innovation when it comes to procurement software, in my books, is, let's say, late 90s, when new wave of solutions, kind of really more tactical sourcing solutions came on board and helped large organizations to, let's say, manage global complex sourcing processes, e-auctions and stuff like that. And then that's when sort of modern procurement suites, the Coupas, the Evaluas and so forth start to emerge. And they are not replacing the transactional systems, they are complementing them with, let's say, more strategic procurement needs. And that was the second wave of innovation. But now I really see that we are seeing a third wave of innovation, which is not about transactions, which is not about processes, but it's really about data. There's just so much, let's say, venture cap money thrown into procurement software landscape right now that it enables a lot of, let's say, very specific players to come up with new cloud-based solutions, which again are not designed to kind of substitute the transactional process systems, but to complement them. You have players in risk domain, you have players in sustainability domain, you have players in very category specific domains as well, IT, spend management and so forth. So there's more and more new solutions that sort of really enable large companies to kind of capture certain business case that they see in certain categories or domains. And because there's so much innovation and VC money now in the field, it's not possible for any player, even for SAP or Coupas of the world, be best in all of the areas. So I think that opens up an opportunity for these, let's say, smaller players to kind of fulfill certain specific needs. And because of cloud, because of the APIs and so forth, it is feasible for companies to kind of complement the transactional process system with these best of breeds. So I think the world has changed both in terms of how much innovation is available, but also how easy it is to integrate these new systems with the existing backbones. And also last comment, it's a long, windy answer, but the last comment I also want to make is that actually, I say this is a third, let's say, wave of innovation in procurement software. But we also need to think about, is it really procurement software we are buying, or in some cases, perhaps we are acquiring data in the disguise of the software. So risk solutions is about software, yes, but also about underlying risk data. Sustainability solutions is about sustainability software, but also underlying data. So more and more, when you think of the sort of digital transformation, you need to think of the digital part, but you also need to think about the data part underlying that.
Yeah, so you self-criticized there by saying it was a long-winded answer, but actually, Sammeli, the interesting bit, the interesting piece was it wove together very well, because that whole idea of the data piece, right? So I agreed, especially when you look at the risk software or risk solutions which are there. Actually, those guys are there providing, a service which is to enable you to have the data on which to evaluate your vendors and also to flag any challenges or problems that come up, and notice trends and changes. The bit that probably is still in this third wave, still a concern for most of us, and I'll maybe turn to you, Costas, for the answer, is to say, if we take each of these different pieces and provision of data, how do we avoid the challenge that we could end up with a whole load of different silos of data? Yeah. And so how do we actually make it like a best of breed that actually works all together?
Yeah. So I think, this idea of silo is one which has a lot of connotations to it, right? And we should maybe understand what we mean by a silo, because people people connect silo with many systems means I have many silos. In reality, yes, that's partially true, but you could also have a suite, to be honest, within itself has silos, right? It's not that if you buy all SAP or all Informatica or all Coupa, that these will not have silos. So first myth kind of out of the window is single solution or single suite does not mean you have no silos. So the silo actually is comes back to strategy, because again, people connect this view that, oh, I went and bought a bunch of random point solutions, hence I have a best of breed strategy. Well, no, you don't. That's not what a best of breed strategy is. It's not buying random solutions and then saying, oh, we're best of breed, right? The idea is that you're explicit and you have a strategy that we want to go best of breed. And what does it mean to do that? Well, we need to have some kind of data foundation around this, particularly on master data, because actually where transactions are raised doesn't necessarily matter if you have common master data in these systems, which is what can actually fuel then the ability to have best of breed. And if we're doing that, there's also, I'd say, quite a large number of benefits with a best of breed strategy, by the way, which is, and I'll take examples for Sievo and HICX, right? You could say that, you buy a BI solution, right? But obviously here you're going to have to go and configure everything and think of all the requirements and have all that know-how. What you're also getting with best of breed is you're getting a specialist who, number one, has thought about this with a lot of other customers, right? So it's saving you a lot of time. So you're kind of accessing this specialist knowledge. What this will also translate into is probably a better user experience and adoption. Because again, what happened with a lot of suites was they tried to do everything and it catered to one persona or one stakeholder, but a lot of others were not kind of core and they weren't being catered to. Again, you have sort of these kind of poor adoption, poor experience. So what we've seen is it's not creating a silo if done correctly. And actually you will have better benefits in terms of adoption, also in terms of not being locked in, right? You don't like one part of your stack. You're not now suddenly saying, oh, well, I can't change this because, I'm going to disrupt all these different teams which are using the same solution. So agility has also become very key, particularly when you think of the last years where companies maybe even feel locked into the ERPs, right? They've invested 100, 200, 300, 400 billions into these SAP Oracle implementations and feel heavily locked in, right? So having the ability to be able to pick and choose is something which is quite appealing, I think, to a lot of big companies moving forward now.
Hey, so absolutely brilliant, because if we talk about what a best of breed actually is, then to you, if I'm correct, and tell me if I've picked it up correctly in what you're saying there, Costas, is having one joined up approach to the way in which you manage the data. So I love the idea of saying, look, the master data across the different pieces, it doesn't have to be exactly the same, but it all has to work together. So if the master data actually works together, that avoids immediately your idea of silos, because you can see the connections. And then secondly, best of breed to you is quite rightly, I agree, not just buying a whole lot of tools, but actually buying the right tools that give you something, like whether it's a shortcut or a head start or a whole lot of experience and knowledge that, yes, of course you could build it yourself, but you'd be starting at the start of the 18 years of Sammeli's experience and the 14 years of your experience. So you say, look, you can buy into that experience and by doing so enhance the user experience straight away and therefore the adoption.
And definitely, and I would add on that, I would say that you in a way buy to that experience of 18 years in Sievo, 14 years in HICX, but you also very much buy into the future innovation that's coming down the road. Yes, if I see how much we can invest, for example, on specifics on how to do payment term analytics or materials benchmarking or something like that, that surely is much more than any individual company in the world can invest. So therefore, you kind of go for the ride for the future as well. And as Costas very well pointed out, the beauty is then that as you are not really locked in. If you don't like the development in the future, you can switch to a more innovative or better player. So you kind of maintain your freedoms, degrees of freedom kind of going forward.
Well, on that piece, the agility piece, right? So obviously not with Sievo and not with HICX, because no one would ever swap out of those two solutions, I'm sure, right?
Yes,
But so I have not seen, so maybe just my experience or so far, but I have not seen a lot of people chopping in and out a lot of the different tools yet. And maybe it's, I immediately think that's because that's where we're on the maturity journey of, let's say, best of breed, where people are still actually building their stack and maybe not refreshing it and chopping things out and chopping them back in so much yet. But I don't know, like, do you actually see a lot of people, not with your tools, but in general, doing that in the procurement landscape so far, maybe moving away from a traditional, ERP or suite to some best of breed tools? I see a lot of that, but I don't know that I'm aware of so far of a lot of people chopping out pieces and slotting a new provider in. Yeah.
But I would say it is where the maturity curve is. So it depends on industry. You're going to see that some are starting to take this approach. Now, of course, you have to address legacy, because in reality, what has happened, as Sammeli said, these tools and suites have sort of been from 2000 kind of, that's when they became mainstream.
Yeah.
I lost my train of thought here.
Well, perhaps I can jump in, because Rob, I actually think it's the right reflection. I haven't seen awfully a lot of, let's say, companies jumping in and out of the between the best of breeds. Yes, seeing a lot of movement from the suites to best of breeds, and it now put me thinking why that is, and I think the positive interpretation is that best of breeds have been able to provide such a good usability that people want to stick. But I partly buy that. But I think it's also partly because somehow the whole best of breed hasn't reached such mainstream level yet. Kind of many of the procurement executives think, okay, if I change the system, I need to train the people or retrain the people. I need to redo the integrations. Why to take that hassle if the old system is not horrible, or if there's not kind of really substantial cost savings? But my view is that kind of as this software is getting more and more consumer-like, the training cost will be close to zero, because the systems kind of provide that, so the training cost goes out of the window. Also, I would argue that the integration costs are going down and down. They will remain, but they will go down and down, and the best of breed start to have out-of-the-box integration capabilities for different kind of solutions. So I would expect to see more of this switching going forward, because the switching cost is going to kind of reduce in the future.
And what I was going to say is the use cases have grown over these 20 years, right? Before, it was very much around procurement. Now the use cases around suppliers and supply chain, sustainability, risk, and all these topics, you can unpick them a lot by category, because sustainability then is it environmental. It varies really by category. So what you're seeing is very, very, and as Sammeli said, you are buying maybe data solutions packaged as a SaaS solution, but you've seen a huge demand and proliferation of new use cases, right? New regulations, new requirements, new mandates for procurement beyond just the traditional. So inherently, this has created a need for these new solutions, because people want to digitize them. So customers have found that eventually they did have to acquire solutions, and now they don't necessarily want to change them, but they do want to try and retrofit, if you like, a strategy around this, because they need this particular tool for sustainability for this one category, and another tool for that, and another tool for innovation. So they don't want to necessarily get rid of them, but they do want to find a way. So in reality, they're at a place of trying to retrofit a best of breed strategy, is what I would say for many of them. So they can then be in a position to plug and play different tools. But where I see the maturity is, we've got these now best of breeds. We want them. How can we retrofit a strategy moving forward, so we can continue on this journey?
Yeah, so brilliant point, Costas. One thing I'm interested there is, as a practitioner, if I look back in the olden days, the agility and the ability to swap, what I would immediately have done is tried to build it into our contracts. Yeah, so I'd have been trying to contractually build in, all of that agility and the capability for me to get in and out easily. What I'm wondering is, in terms of the way in which you see people behaving, and the way in which if we describe that market dynamic, Sammeli, where integration is becoming a lot easier, training's becoming a lot easier. Therefore, a lot of the barriers to change, as you say, are being reduced, maybe not disappearing, but being reduced. Do you also still see a lot of people trying to be creative around contract clauses to enable them to swap? Because even the whole model of cloud-based, etc., enables it. So it becomes so much more inherent anyway. I mean, are you seeing other practitioners really pushing for creative contracting, or is it's just taken as a read that the agility is built in, so people aren't protecting so much for it?
I don't know that it's a contractual topic in the sense that you can build it into your contract, but the challenge was never that the clause wasn't in the contract, right? Because you could.
It was actually doing it. Yeah,
all these clauses have a termination and a term and an end date. People are going to consider that it's been crafted in a way where the impact of change is high, right? And that has nothing to do with a contract. So what you need to be thinking is more, again, how do I create a landscape where the impact of change is not high, right? In terms of rebuilding interfaces, integrations, and there are ways to do that, but that's the point. So it's more crafting your architecture in a way where you can make change happen.
Yes.
From a data and tech point of view, rather than a contractual aspect, because contractual could be there, but you're still going to be inhibited. Anyone could cancel SAP, right? Not because of the contract that they're staying with them. So the cost of change.
And completely agree with that. Also, I don't see it primarily as a contractual issue. So I think and if there's a kind of contractual point to be focusing on, I would say it's not so much on, let's say, the termination clauses and stuff like that. What I would recommend, for example, last week, kind of collect data, we combine, we enrich it in different ways. What we guarantee in our contracts, and I would recommend all the practitioners to demand in their contracts, is to have the right to get the data back, to enrich data back.
Ownership.
If you miss that clause, then the switching cost is huge, because you spent years to kind of enrich the data. Yes, you can get rid of the contract, but the data stays behind. So really, again, if we are moving to kind of more data-led procurement organizations, I think the one contractual clause that you need to have is to ensure that you get the data post-contract as well.
Yeah, grand. You're right. And it's interesting, just that whole, when we talk about agility, then I really, so definitely the ownership of the data and being able to actually shift it. You're right. That was the most obvious one, Sammeli. I was just wondering if people were, because I know I'm not so far, I'm expecting that we've got APIs. Yeah. I'm expecting that integration is possible always until someone tells me otherwise. And I'm expecting that the user experience is such that, the training is less impactful than it could have been, or less expensive, more impactful than it used to be. But I just wonder if people were trying to get creative around actually, doing something about that in contracts, because I entirely agree, Costas. If you have to turn to the contract, the relationship and the journey is pretty much done anyway. Yeah, so it is about making sure you're ready for it rather than protecting for exits or whatever. Yeah. Hey, so one thing I almost forgot about is that the guys who organised the webinar also organised for us to be able to run a poll. Yeah, so that because the people on the line are obviously on mute, so they can put comments, I believe, but they can't immediately interact with us straight away. So I believe the web admin, if I just say the word, the web admin will actually come in and run a poll, which will be getting an understanding of where everyone on the line is with regards to their approach to this best of breed landscape. So around whether we're maybe traditional suite based or looking already at a best of breed, or this is all brand new to you and you're just starting out on the journey. So hopefully, I don't know how I actually see it because
the poll is up.
Beautiful.
Questions are streaming in.
Yeah, Grant. So there's a poll there already. If you'd like to take part, that'd be great, because it would maybe inform some of the questions and the comments from the guys as we go forward. We'll leave that running. I think it runs automatically for 30 seconds or so, but we'll figure out if everyone, as long as everyone's had a chance, everyone who would like to answer has had a chance to answer. I don't think I get to vote. I don't know if you guys get to vote either, right?
I see the vote here at least.
Okay. Yeah. So we'll see what everyone's coming up. So we're about half. 50% of the people have had a chance. I don't know. You tell me. I don't know who the admin is, but if you just tell me when you want to close, I think we're at 50%. We give it another few seconds and see if everybody's able to, because it should be right in front of them. They can click the button if they'd like, and then I'll do like a 10. I'll do a countdown from 10 then.
Yeah, I think there hasn't been many answers streaming in lately, so I think you can start the countdown.
Yeah. So let's stop there then. Thank you very much to the admin for helping us do that. So first thing we have to do then, chaps, is we just have to have a look at this and say, right, in terms of the people that are on the line, what is really interesting is that there's not too many who are 100% suite anymore. Yeah. So maybe I just open up, Sammeli. You can tell us a bit about whether this is what you normally see in either other discussions you have with other customers, etc. Whether this is kind of reflective of your expectation.
Yeah. I would say I'm surprised, and perhaps positively surprised from my point of view. I don't know if we have a biased kind of participation group here today because of the title of people want just to be nice to me and Costas, but I actually think more companies are preferring best of breed versus the suite. I think that's definitely a change. That the poll results would have been quite different, let's say 3-5 years ago. But if assuming this, let's say, represents the wider population, I think it shows where the world is heading.
Yeah, and Costas, same to you. I think my mind. I like the fact that 25% of the people don't have a clear-cut strategy, so are still forming an opinion.
Yeah, I think people are in the process of forming opinions, and like I said, it goes to industry and maturity, depending on where they are. So I think manufacturing sort of based industries are already going to be well ahead in terms of best of breed is generally what we're seeing, or at least retrofitting a best of breed, because I think when an industry is predominantly indirect focused, it's sometimes you can live in a suite for a lot longer, and procurement has a different mandate in an insurance or a bank versus it does for a Unilever or a Mondelez or a or even a BP, right, where they're producing things. So, but I'm also very encouraged to the sense that suite is not the dominant strategy. Clearly, a lot of others are still not fully jumped off the cliff sort of 2 feet in, but I think it's very positive to see the pendulum shift away from suite.
And I think I think one comment kind of regarding what you Costas said earlier. It seems that
we can hear you okay.
Okay, sorry, my screen froze. So one comment kind of going back to what Costas said earlier is that kind of with the best of breed, you actually need the strategy. I think with the suite, it was perhaps easier to kind of put your hands up and say, now the suite provider takes care of everything, and I just pay the bill and everything comes perfectly. The best of breed strategy requires more, let's say, attention and thinking from the procurement how to drive it. I think it leads to much better solution as well, but it does require more responsibility by the practitioners.
And maybe to add to that, I would say also some initial alignment across stakeholders, because particularly the shift suite versus best of breed is where you're seeing organizations move away from being where procurement was kind of siloed in the sense of ordering, paying, traditional sourcing, where today managing suppliers is pretty end-to-end, right? And where businesses are shifting to be more end-to-end, that's where they're seeing that the suite, when it's not just procurement accessing it, the suite isn't that great of a thing for them. But when procurement is on its own, then they're okay within the suite.
I think that's a great reflection, because I think that's a great opportunity also with the best of breeds, because if you take a suite, it will be procurement dominant and it will be serving the procurement users and use cases. And when you go to best of breed with the risk providers, you can go more supply chain. With the sustainability, you can go to those stakeholders and so forth. So suddenly you can drive much better collaboration with your stakeholders and bring something concrete on the table as well.
Yeah, so it's interesting that you guys have brought that to the fore, because actually, yes, I entirely agree. That stakeholder engagement, when you're trying to sell someone on the idea that you want them to bend to your way of working in the suite, rather than actually bringing them, I've got this great solution for sustainability or for the tracking of supplier engagement, etc., that can actually be right from day one a joint solution rather than a procurement solution that you're bringing. Yes, entirely agree. I'm excited about that aspect too. Yeah. So then, gents, in terms of taking us through this idea of the data-led procurement solutions create value, the next bit that I wanted to talk about was actually, so we touched on it already, but about data. So about the idea of, we talked about the silo, getting away from the silo thinking, or the fact that there's probably not silos as long as you focus on having some kind of connection and some kind of joined up strategy, Costas. Yeah. But the bit I wanted to ask you to talk a little bit further about there is your experience of how people are coping with the fact that having data is one thing, but actually being able to do something interesting with it. Yeah. So tying different data sources together, dirty data, internal data, external data, whether you clean the data or you look for other sources, etc. So how people are approaching that the creation of a clean data lake, yeah, rather than what we've all struggled with before, which is just the impossibility of finding data, and then the fact that the one thing you can be guaranteed is that everyone will say, I don't recognize that data. Yeah. So having data that everyone understands and is able to interact with. And maybe Sammeli, I think your camera has disappeared for a second, so I'll turn to you, Costas, first, if that's all right, is to say, hey, with regards to that approach to data, what are you seeing people doing that's really enabling them to make use and sense of the data that they've got?
Yeah, so it's great because Sammeli and us, we look at the data from completely different opposite ends of the spectrum, in the sense of they're on the output side, on the analytics, on the insides. We're very much around the input side, and making sure that you're creating the right data at source. And
yes,
we're particularly focused on master data. So I'll talk a little bit around some key tenets for us.
Yes.
So number one is people should differentiate master data versus transactional data and treat them differently. Number two is people get overly consumed by this idea of cleansing their data. And there are cases where, for Spand, and Sammeli will probably talk to that, where you can do that fine in an extraction mode. But when you want to actually clean up your data in the source systems, in the ERP, to clean up your supplier master, you shouldn't focus that much on cleansing. I know it sounds like the wrong thing to do, but a lot of people who've done this will tell you the same experience, because what tends to happen is in these cleansing projects is you'll pull the data out, right? You'll send it maybe to DNB or someone else or somewhere, and they will clean it and you will review it, all of you, and you'll create this perfect data outside your ERP. And now comes the time, which is, and you've probably taken, half a year or 1 year to do this. And now comes the time, right? We want to correct it in our ERP. Well, by then the data has changed so much. No one is just going to load, 100,000 records back into their transactional system. And it seems like a silly or something so obvious, but people don't realize it. So the reality is you have to focus more on control first, rather than cleanse. And what we mean by this is to stop polluting. And single entry point, that's why for us, for data quality, the onboarding of suppliers is very important, because that's when supplier data quality is established, is when you're creating and collecting that information. So you need to be focused on one entry point, and that makes it sustainable. And to give you a good analogy we've used is take ocean cleanup. It's a big topic, very messy, very difficult to do. Well, key environmentalists say the success of ocean cleanup is 95% is to stop polluting and 5% is cleanup. The same with large organizations. You have to have a way to stop polluting, how you create data across all your systems, not just ERP. And if you do this, then the cleanup can happen in a much more sustainable way in your source systems, right? And that's, what we're very focused on is clean data at the source system. Yeah. Because of course we want to then fuel that into other applications to enable that best of breed landscape to have that common master data. So for us, our kind of tricks are don't focus on cleansing. I know it sounds wrong. Focus first on controlling the entry point and stopping to pollute to give you that kind of a good foundation.
Love it. Okay, brilliant. Yes, as you say, an unexpected answer. Yeah, and Sammeli, I don't know if you have my preamble, but basically the question was, hey, around the use of data, how do we actually get people to be able to make use of the data that they've got, whichever sources, and whether it's cleansing or not, yeah, and etc. But what is it that people should be focused on to make sure that when they do get their hands on data, they're actually able to use it?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I definitely agree with Costas that you shouldn't approach data and data quality improvement as a project. You should approach it as a process, because it's an ever-going exercise. You will have new master data, you will have acquired companies and so forth. So trying to fix it as a project is not going to happen. From our point of view, perhaps the kind of insight I wanted to share is that sort of the big shift we've seen sort of in the last 5-10 years is, and we did procurement analytics like 5 years ago still, it was mostly around, let's get this internal data, the purchase orders, the invoices, the vendor master, material master, and let's create analytics on top of that. And there we also kind of provided value by helping our clients to establish the process to classify spent data into categories and so on. And it's still very much at the core of our, let's say, value prop. The better master data our customers have, the easier that job is. And so luckily there's different kind of approaches to improve on that. But I think the big change we've seen in the last few years is that because there's so much innovation from the different kind of best of breed solutions, there's a lot of this external data available.
Yes.
And of course, the internal data you can create controls and processes around, but the external data, whether that's supplier risk ratings, whether that's CO2 data, whether that's diversity data and so forth, it comes from external sources, which means that by definition, you don't have a control on that. But still, because the nature of the data and all innovation is that you take existing pieces of knowledge, and when you combine them, you get the new aha moment. 1 + 1 = 3. And the same is with internal and external data. And that's really the kind of key value we provide to our clients today. Yes, we can take care of your 100 different ERPs and make sense of that spend data, and that's lovely. But at the same time, we can bring in market data to create, let's say, cost benchmarking. We can bring in sustainability data to create sustainability scorecards, CO2 data to CO footprint, and so forth. So in that sense, I think the really new trend is that there's so much data available out there. And accessing and acquiring that data, it's easy. You just kind of contract with the right provider and you get the data. But still you have the very practical challenge. They call suppliers ABC, I call them DEF. They call categories XYZ, it's 1, 2, 3. How do you combine those data sets? Everybody speaks about machine learning and AI and fancy cognitive stuff. The damn reality is, how do I click these materials together? And that's where the challenge of the dirty data it is. It's fancy to speak big words, but very practical challenges. I have 55 different external data sources. I have 25 ERPs. How I do connect those data sets? It's not cool, but it's value adding.
I love the pragmatism and the honesty. Yeah. So to say yes, it's maybe not ML and AI in a lot of cases. Yeah, a lot of cases it is just trying to figure out, right, how do we piece all these pieces together, and let's say when you say it's maybe not cool, one thing that I apart from the fact that it sometimes sounds not cool is also how you build a business case, right? Because it's not cool. People aren't so excited about it. You know,
put the ML and AI in the business case anyways, then you can...
Well, that's it. So you might still have to talk about AI and ML to get the funding. But no, that's exactly what triggered it in my brain, is to say, right, around that whole business case piece then. So I've been lucky enough to work in organizations that actually did understand the idea that, hey, we'll have an approach to master data or to data as a whole. Yeah. But let's say not all of them have to the same extent. Yeah. And so when you're trying to build a business case to say, look, I really just want to have a proper approach, whether it's to cleansing or to controlling and avoiding further polluting your data, it's not cool. It's difficult to build a business case. What secrets or tips have you guys seen to people who've been really successful there in enabling that kind of ROI from data?
Yeah. I think for us it's so relatively straightforward because we believe that seeing is believing. So when we approach our client and want to help them kind of create a business case, quite often we do, let's say, pilot or proof of concept. We take data from a certain source system, so a certain category, or look at a certain lever, and we put the data through our system. And then when we go to represent the results, it's not so much about how do we classify spend or that stuff, that as well, yes. But then it's also about, okay, we identified 20 million euros in that category on market benchmarking only, or we identified that much on payment terms. So here you see some risk and so forth. So very concretely being able to kind of show them that the value is here. And it's not sort of rocket science. It's not like a great analyst couldn't have done that on Excel. It's just when you have 20 million transaction lines, doing that in Excel is time consuming. So it's really just unearthing and automatically prioritizing those opportunities. And when that value is on table, then I think the whole discussion about business cases is relatively straightforward.
Yeah, and Costas, if we talk about the fact that data is sometimes not cool, definitely talking about supplier master data, I'm sorry to have to say it, is not often seen as that cool in the organizations that I've been in. Right?
It's not, but you know, it's getting cooler.
Yeah, it's getting cooler. Yeah, luckily. Yeah, but so tell me, like from your point of view, what have you seen that people are? I mean, turning people on to the idea that look, we'll actually do something with this, which will be at like the backbone of our best of breed solution. That's a good way to talk to them about it. But what about an actual ROI and a tangible impact there?
By the way, the ROI obviously can be quite broad, and you're right. With data, you sometimes have to take an indirect ROI, right? To Sammeli's point, you know, you look at the identification of savings opportunities and things like that. So risk prevention, all these kind of things. But there is also the ability to make a quantitative business case here, because people forget that there's a lot, you know, big companies, and that's who we normally work with, have lots of volume. So lots of supplier data, lots of changes to this data, lots of compliance related to changes happening with the data, not just procurement, right? So it could be traditional finance and fraud for banking, but it could be quality, sustainability, insurance. So all these things, by the way, have a component of data and information governance to make sure that you are compliant, your information is up to date, all these things. Now, when you start to add these up, you know, 20,000 suppliers, 3 documents, you know, 10 changes, whatever per year. These are astronomical numbers in terms of the effort your organization expends around this. So you can easily build an FTE business case where you are shaving off, you know, 50%. So that could be like, we have one customer from 21 FTEs that went down to 8 FTEs. So saving 13 full-time equivalents who are involved in this process, because don't forget, there's a lot of redundant work which is done because different functions have to repeat common activities around management of data. So this all will add up. So you can also build a complete FTE kind of business case around the efficiency which you can gain from here.
Well, can I ask you a follow-up on that, if you don't mind, right? So if I look at, so FTEs, definitely I'm on board with you. If you can qualify, right, there's this amount of actual work happening, and then you can quantify that into FTEs, and you can create a business case there. The bit that I was interested, as you talked about some of the other avenues, is if I look at, so a business case that I did in a previous organization with regards to the implementation of procurement tooling, and we tried to include in there a piece around compliance, right? So we looked at historic fraud and said, right, look, hey, if actually the control and the visibility of data, can that help us to affect compliance? Of course it can, yeah? So, if you have no procurement system and you put a procurement system in, boom, you've got, you're already 100% better than you used to be. So what effect does that hopefully have on compliance? And so whether it's actual fraud or whether it's regulatory fines or whatever, trying to quantify things around that. So are you seeing people actually do creative things around quantification of compliance or those pieces, or I mean, as well as the traditional FTE approach?
You are seeing that, but I think It depends on the drivers and the organization. For some organizations, you can do that, and particularly if you've had a recent penalty or compliance issue, then that will be the tactic, because that's the easiest tactic which you can take. If you haven't, that tactic sometimes isn't, they'll say
so well received by a CFO,
but it hasn't happened. But I think there's plenty of other things, right? So one is the efficiency elements, which I mentioned more from the data management, but see it also from the supplier's experience. So what we're trying to do here is better data also makes their life easier as well, and reduces kind of the friction. And that reduction in friction means less supplier inquiries. The supplier gets their things done quicker. So we've also seen building up a business case on the gain from the supplier, because part of what we're trying to do is to show that it can be win-win and look at the supplier experience, because if they're more efficient, you're actually inherently also significantly more efficient internally, because if you make their life difficult, unfortunately they're going to make your life
someone's paying for it. Agreed. Someone's got to pay.
So there's also a business case being built up around the supplier experience piece as well, and removing the friction within that.
I mean, if we look back at, because I was lucky enough to work in automotive for a while, obviously, where things were fairly well developed around open book costing, and actually getting into the supplier's costs. And so, as you say, if their experience is poor, that is just the cost that has to be managed, and therefore is effectively transferred back into your pocket, right? So, have you seen people really getting into like an old traditional automotive approach to kind of open book costing with the supplier and saying, look, you don't need 3 account managers now, you only need 1, and you don't need 4 invoice clerks and all this kind of stuff? Or is it still more theoretical, or is it not maybe quite as mature as that yet?
No, I definitely see this in FMCG, and that's the language they're talking, is exactly what you mentioned. What ultimately our brand, right, and what goes into that starts with the supplier and the supply chain, because eventually you optimize everything internally, you have to start optimizing externally, right? And COVID also changed things as well. Like, customer of choice didn't really matter when you have abundant supply, but suddenly in times of constrained supply, you were interested to be that customer of choice suddenly, and you didn't have the same power as you do by being a big corporate. So we've seen these dynamics also change the thinking that we need to set up our suppliers for success, because if we don't, we're paying the penalty for that, and our customers are paying the penalty for that eventually as well, right? Because it's just a chain, as you say. So yes, we are definitely seeing that kind of thinking now, which I love, right? It's the next kind of level of maturity.
And I suppose it's, Sammeli, just one thing that immediately came into my mind when we started talking about that, the cost of this supplier experience, was the whole idea that I'm sure is well ingrained in the work you're doing around the cost of every order, the cost of the cost of the analytics itself. So when you say yes, you could build it yourself, that I'm sure it's exactly the same when I was in Ford. We used to talk about X number of dollars per order and all that kind of thing. But that whole approach to efficiency within the procurement world, they go in hand. So we've got the supplier experience, we've also got the procurement experience, and having the data enables you to immediately streamline the whole process.
Exactly, and I think there's a multiple facets to that. In our case, sort of, it's quite seldom that we would do, let's say, FTE-based business cases, because it's not that. Okay, sometimes yes, there's big analytics teams, and sort of by automating we can replace something out of there. But the beauty of the analytics is more kind of provide insights that wouldn't be there otherwise. And I think that's where the business value is. And I think it's also very much then around also kind of the procurement sort of employee experience. If you have good tools, usable tools, if you can play with them, you get the insights, it feels natural and so forth. It's quite different experience compared to typing in SAP query parameters, stuff like that. So I think and I think procurement has had a challenge of, let's say, attracting great talent. So I think part of the game, I don't think this is the most important thing, but part of the game is also providing good interesting tools there. And going actually to Jay's point on the chat, I think as we provide procurement analytics, of course, one of the alternatives is that companies can do it yourself, sort of based on Tableau or Power BI or whatnot. But also there, I think, again, sort of instead of doing it yourself, but going to analytics provider, yes, you get the kind of inbuilt experience, but you also get better usability in most of the cases, which drives the employee experience as well.
Yeah, love it. Yeah, sorry, I failed. I was still on the poll. I failed to see the chat. You're right. Yeah. So I know. Thanks for pointing that out to me. I should have been checking it. But although I think, well, we've got 9 minutes left. In 5 minutes, we'll definitely stop and open up to the questions. Unless, Duncan, you tell me if we should actually be opening up now. It feels like we probably should be. Yeah.
No, you're right. I was just going to point out the other comment as well, of course, from Jekaterina. Best of breed is also the latest recommendation from Gartner, which I believe is an evolution in their position as well.
Okay, there we go. So we're not off on a tangent, yeah?
No. And if anybody has got a question, do pop it into the chat at any point.
Grant, thank you. Right, so then we've 9 minutes left, gents. Right, the bit there. I'm quite encouraged by the fact that we're not off on a tangent. Gartner also agree with us. That's lucky. Yeah, but also the idea that we've talked a bit about. Let's say people's approach to having a strategy for data, both from a procurement experience and the supplier experience. The last bit, so we've talked a bit about the data bit. The bit I wanted to just make sure we focus on is that idea about the creation of value. So obviously we talked about the idea of efficiency there, Costas, but also the other pieces around risk, etc., and the benefits that having a decent joined up supplier experience can bring. And we talked, Sammeli, about the idea of the procurement experience and how you can, let's say, efficiency optimization, having let's say, empowering procurement individuals to have a less tactical future, yeah, which is very interesting to those of us who are practitioners, yeah, but also the identification of savings. But what I wanted to just check is there that in procurement, I spend a lot of my time talking about how procurement will bring value beyond savings, yeah? And so I wanted to just open up to you guys and say, right, can you give some examples or some ideas that you have around and maybe some practices that you've seen around where people are really using the idea of data to point out to an organization the value they can bring beyond pure savings, because that to me feels a little bit tactical and old-fashioned, yeah? So it's really moving us beyond that discussion, yeah?
And that's a great question. First of all, I do believe savings will be part of the procurement kind of one of the key KPIs going forward. That's not going to go away. At the same time, I think what makes me super proud and excited right now is that actually just a couple of weeks ago, we launched our CO2 analytics product. The fact is that more and more companies are setting, let's say, net zero targets. The fact is also most of the emissions are not sort of in-house production, but they are again captured in the supply chain. So in the same way, most of the cost is in supply chain, most of the emissions are in the supply chain. And I think this is a great opportunity and example. It's a great example of how, again, internal data, what I have purchased and from whom, can and should be combined by CO2 intensity data to provide new kind of insights, not where the money is, but where the emissions are. And of course, that provides a great sort of place to start all the CO2 reduction activities in supply chain, because then you can go to the most emitting suppliers, you can go to most emitting materials, you can go to most emitting plants and so forth, and start to have discussions how we can run that down. It's great analytics. I'm excited about that, but it also provides procurement a new kind of opportunity to kind of widen the mandate, kind of go to sustainability, go to management team, go to board and say, hey, this is where we have the CO2. This is how much it would cost to compensate, and probably we can't afford that. And at the same time, you as a board said that there needs to be a net zero by 2035. So we have 150 million euro problem here. How can we solve that collaboratively with the suppliers and so forth? And I find sort of 18 years I've been doing procurement analytics and I love it. But at the same time, sometimes I ask myself the question, kind of creating savings for large companies, does that feel purpose in the life? Sometimes I've been looking at mirror and seeing whether that's the case. But now driving down the CO2 emissions from some of the largest companies in the world is a huge positive.
Yes.
And also, if you think of procurement talent gap, how do we get talented people into procurement, the new millennials? I think this is one of the drivers that all procurement functions can use to actually attract the best talent.
Love it. And actually that link to suppliers and the fact that the supplier is so important in terms of spend and scope 3 and is right in your wheelhouse, Costas. Yeah. So I imagine you're in violent agreement so far.
No, we are in violent agreement, and for us, we see procurement's kind of role shifting again very much when we think about optimizing the supplier experience. It's really to being that steward of data, because our view is that more and more you see things are coming from the wider supply chain rather than internally, and
yes,
procurement has to be the connector of that and of those two worlds, and that's where they can add value. But beyond just savings, right, it is around being able to claim the CO2 emissions, being able to drive sustainable kind of impact. So you're obviously needing, if you think of the targets which companies are setting now, obviously it's not going to be themselves on their own achieving that, right? It's going to be with kind of the full force of their supply chain. So we see kind of this mandate of stewarding the experience and making it easier for suppliers and internal customers to work together, right? And foster that kind of better collaboration.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's an interesting one as well, because, and I know we've only got 3 minutes, but we talked a bit about the whole idea of data, and we as an organization start to think about our strategy for our data and building it and looking at different options to bring and enhance that data. But actually, that last point, Costas, I wholeheartedly agree with. The idea that actually it's not even going to be us. It's going to be us and our supply chain and our competitors and the whole network. And so building an approach to data actually doesn't stop at our front door. Yeah.
No, so people are just now realizing this, right? And that's why we think supplier experience is so important, because, okay, there are external sources, but you do depend heavily on your suppliers for more and more data these days. And you need to be making it easier and easier for them to give you that data in more automated manners. And that's kind of why we say the experience. If you improve the supplier experience, you'll get better data. If you get better data, you can improve and make that experience even better to get, even better data, right? And that's kind of how we see it. They are very, very interlinked, but the future is going to be data coming from your supplier. So you need to be thinking, how am I setting myself up in a way where I can make this as frictionless as possible? Because you see that, right? There are so many portals for suppliers to go and enter different types of data, CO2 data, conflict mineral data, palm oil, kind of reporting on these kind of topics. So farmers data, right, which you're collecting. There's all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, love it. So brilliant, Costas. And Sammeli, sorry, you sat forward, so I wasn't sure if you wanted to say one last thing, because we've got 1 minute. Yeah?
Well, what should I say? I think it's exciting times for procurement in the future. More data, more capabilities to capture that, opportunity to collaborate with stakeholders within and across the organization. So at least it's a great time to be alive. That's my parting.
Yeah, totally agree. And so, thank you very much, gents, for answering so openly and so honestly and so engagingly. And I really appreciate your time. Thank you. It certainly improved my understanding of the approach to data and best of breed. And I'll hand back to you, Duncan. I think we've only got 30 seconds.
That's
Apologies.
It. Yeah, no, just wanted to say, obviously, thank you very much. Thanks, especially to you, Rob, for being the voice of the practitioner and chairing that session for us today. That was a really enlightening session and, great discussion. So thanks, everybody, and thanks to the listeners for joining as well.
Thanks for the audience. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thanks.
Cheers, everybody. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.